Hi everybody, TJ Mac Vintage Cards, and I'm doing episode 3 today of Through the Cardboard, and I'm looking at a profile of Bobby Mitchell. And Bobby Mitchell was a running back and wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns and Washington Redskins. That's what they were known at the time, and he played from 1958 to 1968. And he's a player that I really didn't know that much about when I decided to do this profile on him for this episode. And I learned quite a bit about him. He was actually the first African-American player to play for the Washington Redskins. And the Washington Redskins were the last team to integrate in the NFL. And he was also in the shadow of Jim Brown, who he played with in Cleveland. There's a picture of Jim Brown, and they formed a pretty good backfield because he was more the power runner and Jim Brown was, and then Bobby Mitchell was more the quick, fast runner. And what was really interesting is Jim Brown really had a lot of respect for Bobby Mitchell as an athlete, and he was always asking him to race against Bobby Mitchell, and Mitchell was a world-class runner, so there's no doubt that he would have beat Jim Brown in a race. But Mitchell was a very humble guy, and he would refuse to race against Brown, saying, "Oh, Jim, I know you could beat me," and he would just kind of play it off and never attempted to do it. And actually, Bobby Mitchell was a world record holder in the indoor hurdles, and he was drafted in the 7th round of the NFL draft by the Cleveland Browns because many teams thought that he was going to actually go to the Olympics and not want to play football. So I thought that was really interesting that they got that great of a fine just because of what they thought his intentions were going to be. And I also learned that Mike McCormick, who was he was a tackle guard for the Cleveland Browns, and here's his 55 Bowman card. He actually talked about when Brown came on the team that they threw so many screens to him that he would just take them in for touchdowns. And he said in his comments in one of the videos I was watching that Brown probably had more 80-yard screens for touchdowns than any team in NFL history, just because they utilized that quick game-breaking speed and the elusiveness he had. He would break the tackle, then he would take off and head for the end zone from there. So just a great, great athlete that he was. And there was a story of Bobby Mitchell in 1959. He was in a game, and it was the third quarter, and he had 232 yards rushing at the time. And the NFL rushing record was 237 yards, held by Jim Brown, who was his teammate. And the note came to Paul Brown, the coach, that, hey, Bobby Mitchell's within 5 yards of breaking the record. And what did Paul Brown do after that? Never gave him another carry the rest of the game. So he never ended up breaking Brown's record in that game. And when I saw an interview with Bobby Mitchell, he thought, well, it wasn't so much because he was afraid of having Jim Brown, have his record broken. He believes Paul Brown did it because he was going to use that as a negotiation tool to get more money out of him at the end of the season. So he didn't want to have him break that record. Because if anything, Paul Brown was a big believer in motivation. You think if he'd want him to break the record, so Jim Brown would even come out more fired up the next game to do more. But apparently that was not the case. So what happened with Bobby Mitchell, he played through 1961 with the Browns, and then it was said in a show I was watching that Coach Paul Brown saw what Vince Lombardi was doing with Paul Hornung and Jim Taylor. So what he did is he traded Bobby Mitchell for the rights to draft Ernie Davis, the big running back was coming out of Syracuse University, and they made a movie about him. And it turned out that Ernie Davis died of leukemia before he even took one carry in the NFL. So Mitchell ends up going to the Washington Redskins, where he becomes a wide receiver. And just to tell you the kind of athlete this guy was, is that he goes from being a running back to wide receiver. In his first year in Washington, he leads the NFL in catches and yards and becomes a first-team All-Pro at the receiver position. And then the next season, what does he do? He leads the NFL in yards again. So he has back-to-back seasons where he leads the NFL in yards, and then in 1964, he leads all receivers in touchdowns. So this is just the caliber of athlete that this guy was. And it also shows you that at that time, the NFL, the passing game was really just coming into more and more mainstream in the offenses. So you were seeing that with some of these running backs that were typically running backs before were becoming wide receivers because passing was becoming more a focal point of the game. So he was just, again, just a great player. And then after his retirement in 1968, it was my understanding he was really heavily involved with Bobby Kennedy and his presidential campaign. And as I understood it, he became real close to him and became concerned about Bobby Kennedy's safety. He did not make the trip with Kennedy to California when he was assassinated. And one of his concerns was the safety of Bobby Kennedy, and that's why he didn't make the trip. And it was one of those things that he really felt bad about, because that was the trip that Kennedy ultimately was assassinated on. After retirement as well, he became a scout for the Redskins, was very well respected as a scout, was responsible for drafting many of the great Washington Redskin players of the 70s, became an assistant general manager. Many thought he could have become a general manager, but, at the time he played, unfortunately, a lot of African Americans didn't get that type of look to be in those types of positions at that time. And I know that's even a challenge to some degree today, but especially so back then. So I think, I just really wanted to take this time and do this short video just to highlight this great man, the great career that he had, and hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Through the Cards, and look forward to doing another one again soon.